So I think the big thing starts with people just waking up and beginning to say no and saying, okay, look, the more credence that I give to government, the more that they're going to take. We ultimately, slaves are only slaves through voluntary efforts, right? I mean, meaning that at any point a slave could say, enough's enough, and I'm going to fight back. They might lose their life, but they're going to. It's within their power.
They're not passive.
It's within their power, right? We say that in the United States of America that it's by the consent of the governed. Well, what if we stop consenting? What if we start to say, enough's enough?
She's truly a breath of fresh air. Tracey ignites dreams, and when you walk away from a meeting with Tracey Martin, you walk away with what I call a ripple effect.
And the type of energy that was radiating from her was like a ripple effect. I never met someone like her before, and I knew that her intentions were pure, and she spoke nothing but the truth.
I couldn't imagine, honestly, anybody else who I've ever met in my life being as helpful as Tracey's been towards me and the rest of my family.
Whatever problem you've got, however dark it may be, there is no judgment, there is no finger pointing, there is only healing.
Check in with Tracey. Do the work. You got this.
Welcome to TLM Nation. I'm your host, Tracey Martin. This podcast exists to make you think and ask questions, to amplify the voices of Gen Z and those that are doing good out in the world, to lift the veil on some truths that we all need to hear, and to have transparent conversations that lead to change. It is time to be bold. TLM Nation podcast starts now. Welcome back to TLM Nation. It's me again, T, and I have to tell you guys, I have wanted to do this podcast for a while. As you know, we've been slowly lifting the veil on a few things, only from a place of education and giving you a sense of calm. But then a big thing with my guest here is getting solutions in place. So that's really what we're all about, because we know we can really run around all different ways and not have any kind of peace around this, what's happening in the world, which is where most people are today. So I'm going to let Todd introduce himself to you. Todd and I met when we opened up the coaching studio back in 2020 when everything went crazy, because I felt like there was a need to gather people together. There was no information, nobody knew what was going on, and I think some people understood it but didn't want to see it. So we opened up the coaching studio, and Todd and his wife were sweet enough to come in and basically saw that we were wanting to be of service and help our community in some way, shape, or form, no matter how small that was. So Todd came in. We originally started with one person, one topic, one task to help people educate in Arizona about our laws, our legislature, what's on the bill, what was happening, what was being taken away from us more than anything. And then that became a relationship, and I have so much respect for you. But I'm going to let Todd kind of take it away here, give you a little bit of background on who he is and kind of why I reached out to Todd for his wisdom and his understanding on where we are today. So please.
Hey, I appreciate it. Nice to see you again.
Yes.
So, yeah, my name is Todd. I go by Toddzilla, a lot of people, so the monster that lives next door, I guess. I kind of woke up, so to speak, about 30 years ago. So kind of through a series of events, which I won't bore you with, I began to kind of question what was going on around us and the reality of this world and the influence of government and what the authority they actually had and didn't have in our lives. And so through an entire long process of waking up, I began to get more and more entrenched in realizing that our reality, or what we think of as our reality, is very synthetic. So much of what we believe is true is not true. So Napoleon said, history is a lie agreed upon, right? And it's right in the word, his story, right?
Yes.
Who gets to make the history is the winners. So if we go back and we think about COVID and what happened there, what will the history books say in 10 years? Mm-hmm. Are they going to talk about people like you and I who challenged it? Are they going to talk about people who stood against it? They're going to write the narrative the way that they want to write it.
Right.
So it's those types of things that I began to kind of realize that the world is definitely being controlled and run, and the more and more that you dig into it, you realize that there's a lot of control mechanisms in place. In fact, anything that is an institution essentially is in place to control us.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
who I am
No,
and how I got to this
But
point.
it's interesting that you say that though, because I think like when this was all happening, we talked a little bit ago before the podcast started, but it was you felt it.
Yes.
Right?
There was an energy around COVID.
There was an
that
energy.
The world felt.
Yes, the world felt it. Almost felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath us, but it was almost like there was almost and I know this was the intention, of course, the division, but there was a split between people that were seeking, to understand and were seeking solutions, and then the other ones that were pretty much just running amok. So when a moment like that happens, like COVID, and we know there's been many other in our his story. I'm going to steal that now. We know that what is the mechanism for the mental? We talked about the mind control part, right. which gives them, the ability to keep moving the football.
Yeah. So a lot of it is trauma-based mind control.
Okay.
And so they need to do something that essentially fractures the psyche. There has to be a big event that occurs. 9/11 was a big event. The killing of John F. Kennedy was a big event. About, I don't know, we can do the math. It's about every 19 or 20 years, some
right.
big event happens. Yeah. And killing of Lincoln, I mean, it kind of, those things go on and on. And when that happens, there's a fracturing of the psyche, of the collective psyche. People get lost, right? And they begin then to look to somebody for solutions. Right. So if you know who David Icke is, and there's other ones like him, say problem, reaction, solution.
Yes.
They create the problem, they elicit the reaction, and they have their prepackaged solution. So COVID was the same thing, right? I mean, from the very beginning, when I saw that Neil Ferguson from the London School of Economics was the one making predictions, I knew, because I'd run across this guy before. I was like, oh, okay, well, this is going to be a nothing burger. We're not going to see anything really occur out of this from a mass death standpoint.
Right.
And as it turns out, that's right. It was akin to the flu. And even Fauci at one point said, I have to admit that the deaths of COVID are nothing more than akin to a bad flu season.
Right. And so how much do you think, I know we can talk about this all day long, but the driver of this, because even like if you look at the vaccine world, okay, so like they make $60 billion a year off of vaccines, but they make $500 billion off of the quote unquote treatment remedies. So when you're saying David Icke, problem, solution, reaction.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Backwards. Then you realize that this is all completely manipulation at this point.
Yeah, well, one of the big characters in this whole worldwide narrative or the worldwide plan to change the world is Bill Gates, right? I mean, at least publicly facing. I mean, we don't know the names of the people behind the scenes, but Bill Gates' father, as you and I have talked about before, took over for Margaret Sanger at Planned Parenthood. He was a eugenicist. You see Bill Gates Jr. doing the same exact thing. He's just a eugenicist on a larger scale. And so he has done all kinds of things across the world. I believe it's India has said we'll arrest him if he comes there.
Yes, I did see that.
Africa, there's countries in Africa that he's not allowed back into. He's been doing these problem, reaction, solutions and going in there and doing these green movements and World Health type of things.
Under the guise of that. Yeah.
Well, he's actually the largest private donor of the World Health Organization, right? And de facto the president of it. Tedros is taking orders from the guy, I think. But anyways, he doesn't do anything that he ultimately isn't profiting off of, right? I mean, he's got the goal of being a eugenicist in his father's footsteps, but at the same time, he's trying to profit. My wife likes to say, follow the money, right? No matter what's going on in the world.
True statement.
Ultimately follow the money, and you're going to find out who's benefiting.
No, it's true. So what do you think is a good doorway? Because one of the things was, the biggest, I always ask people, what's the biggest lie? Well, we can have many of those, right? There's lots of contenders. But like when it comes down to the average American person that was really taken aback by all of this and then maybe pulled themselves back up a little bit in a certain way, like they got a little bit of information, What do you think is one of the biggest things? And I know we talked about, one of the things I talked about was just like our home, our country.
Yeah.
You know, the truth about America. Would you share a little bit about like what that actual truth is? Because so many people say, oh, we're a democracy and we're not. I mean, would you share some of that?
Yeah. So when you hear the words the United States, okay, that is not the United States of America.
Right.
The United States of America is the country. The United States is the corporation that runs the government, basically.
Right.
Or I'd say our government today, what we think of as the government.
Right.
They all work for the United States. They work for that corporation. It's a really complex topic, but ultimately every state is a corporation. Ultimately every county is a corporation.
Okay.
There has been an overlay on the U.S. map, redrawing all the lines to draw corporate lines over on top of the actual
State lines.
the meets and bounds lines
Okay.
of the geography of the state of Arizona. And so they've changed that so that they can play the word games, right? And what they like to tell us is that we live in a democracy, making the world safe for democracy.
Yeah.
The truth is that our country was actually founded, and we can get into that founding of our country and the legitimacy of government if you want.
Right.
But our country was founded as a constitutional republic, which essentially limited the scope of government to very specific functions: post offices, post roads, coinage of money, the protection thereof, national defense, and a few others. I think there were 16 specific functions called out in the Constitution that was the function of the government.
Okay.
And then it literally says anything not mentioned in the Constitution is up to the states and the individuals themselves. The idea was always behind the founding of this country was to break away from call it the monarchy, call it
British.
I mean in any sense of any country in the world of
Okay.
having a single king or a single set
Gotcha.
of rulers to run this. It was all about self-responsibility. It was all about making the individual the government, self-governance. Along the lines, they began to slowly shift that, and they began to take more and more power through statutes. Okay, statutes are corporate law. They're not like based off of the Ten Commandments.
Right.
And so then they began to shift and say, we live in a democracy. Well, the democracy is the worst form of government in the world. So most people are, there's probably going to freak some people out who hear that, but it's true. Where a constitutional republic is all about self-responsibility, a democracy is a mobocracy. Okay, that's two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for lunch.
Right.
So here's a perfect example of why a democracy is a bad idea and doesn't work. How many people live in America, roughly?
About 300 and some billion.
Million. Right.
Sorry.
Let's say about 330 million people,
Yeah.
right? How many of those would you guess are of voting age?
Oh gosh, like 24% are
I
like Gen Z, 18.
Yeah, probably
Something like
half,
that?
right?
Yeah,
Maybe, let's just say that it's, and I don't know the answer exactly, but let's just say that it is 18 and older are a voting age in this country. So let's just say that it's probably, likely it's 2/3, but let's just say
Yeah.
it's half. Let's
Yeah.
say it's 160 million
Million
people.
people, right.
Okay. Now, allegedly, Joe Biden got 81 million votes. Okay.
Yes.
So let's break it down. 81 million people get to tell the other 200 and do the math for me, 250 million
Yes.
people how to live.
Right.
That's a mobocracy for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Be no different if you and your husband, my wife, myself, and another couple go out to dinner. You get up to take a telephone call, and we put it to a vote to see who's going to pay for dinner. And four of the six of us say Tracey's going to pay for dinner while we're gone.
Yeah.
Right. Or while you're gone. 4 out of 6 of us say it.
It's a great
Does it
metaphor.
make it any more legitimate?
Yeah.
It doesn't legitimize the fact that you have no obligation
Right.
to do it. But that's the way mobocracy works, is that people believe that since the majority voted, we now have some sort of a social contract that forces us into living with this set of rules, this set of leaders. So
No, that makes sense. So is it true? Because I was writing some notes down here. So I was reading that we're actually like a city state with the District of Columbia. It's like 10 to 12 miles of just and it was one with London and then the Vatican. And
the city of London, and the Washington D.C. are the
city states.
Yeah. Let's see. It's the false triune. Okay.
Okay.
So to put it in kind of a biblical sense, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Satan always likes to mimic.
What God creates, Satan counterfeits.
Satan isn't able to create anything, right?
Right.
He's a mimicker. That's
Yeah.
all he does. So the Vatican is the center of religion.
Right.
The City of London is economics, and Washington D.C. is the center of power.
So military.
It's the military. It's
Okay.
it's the UN essentially.
Okay.
Right. Ultimately, the UN is controlled by Washington D.C. We're the biggest part of the UN. So
Right.
And we're the largest. I don't know that we're the largest army in the world or the largest military in the world, but we have the largest military presence.
Right.
We have more bases in more countries than any other nation in the world. So we are the world's police force, right?
Right.
You hear the propaganda all the time on our media of we have to make the world safe for democracy.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah.
Right?
No, it's
So
crazy.
So it's a city state, a nation state. Excuse me. Now I'm going to get myself confused. City state. I think
City,
you're right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so the three of those are the three powers in the world.
So that I saw was like 1982 when that was finalized. Is that correct? So it was like 1982, and then the one I was researching came down to basically it was a tyrannical Roman law mimicked.
I'm not familiar with
that
it.
is.
I'm not familiar with the 1982.
Well, there's a book out there. I should have brought it with me. There's a book called The Empire of Cities, and it talks about these three, like what you're saying. It's the Trinity,
Right.
Mimicked or counterfeited. But it was those three. So for us as American citizens, I mean, I know they're trying to push us global, right? But for us here, what do you think, like mentally with people when they wrap their heads around, what does that mean for them on a daily basis to know more about where we actually are?
Yeah. So I think it kind of goes back to the analogy that I gave you that if we were out to dinner and you went to take a call, right? And the rest of us voted. I think a lot of it is people have to begin to realize that government, even of and in themselves, are illegitimate, any government in the world. And one way to think of this is, let's say that you were born in Detroit. And you were born very, very close to the east side of Detroit. If you were born just 2 miles further, you would have been born in Canada. So does that, by just happenstance of where you were born, force you into having to follow that government?
No.
What if you were born in Nogales on the north side of the border? Or if you were born in Nogales, Arizona on the south side of the border, separated by feet? Are you forced? Does that government have that government have a legitimate claim over your life to tell you how to live, what health you're forced into,
all your choices,
your schooling, everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think the big thing starts with people just waking up and beginning to say no and saying, okay, look, the more credence that I give to government, the more that they're going to take. We ultimately, slaves are only slaves through voluntary efforts, right? I mean, meaning that at any point a slave could say, enough's enough, and I'm going to fight back. They might lose their life, but they're going to. It's within their power.
They're not passive.
It's within their power, right? We say that in the United States of America that it's by the consent of the governed. Well, what if we stop consenting? What if we start to say, enough's enough? We don't want this anymore. We don't want to do it. And I think part of it is, you want to be educated, but you also don't want to give a lot of credence. You don't want to give a lot of legitimacy. You want to be able to stand up. And I know you have great guests that you've had on and coming on who've gone against school boards, and it's amazing what one person can accomplish. And part of it is just saying, no, I'm just not going to put up with this. I'm just not going to be a part of this. I'm not going down this road. A lot of people did it during COVID. A lot of people said, I'm not going to take that shot. Some people lost their jobs. Some people got kicked out of school. Some people
There was a price to pay for it.
Absolutely. Some people got kicked out of their families.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We have some friends who literally won't see us.
Yeah.
So
I had the same.
I mean,
Yeah.
right. But is it wrong to be right? I mean, you're right. I mean, that's the way they want you to feel.
Mm-hmm.
They want you to believe that if you're standing up, that you're the only one, and that's wrong to be right.
Yeah, and eventually you go with the herd.
Yeah,
You
I don't
know,
know
I
if
think
I've
that's part
answered
of
your
it.
question, but
No,
I think part of
absolutely.
it is people need to understand where they're at and what their power is. And
Right.
their power really lies within themselves of being able to stand against and say, no, I'm not going along with
So
it.
if people push back, and we know there were prices to pay for that, right? We've all experienced that. Once you do that, you know, what would you say is the next step? Because we talk about like self-sufficiency, you know, taking care of yourself, all those kinds of things, having solutions in place, knowing that I know this, but I don't want to get in the weeds, right? I want to stay focused on that. What would you say like the top 3 things are for people right now who are at that point? They're basically like, I'm not going to, and if something comes down the pipeline, which we already talked it's going to probably,
Right.
Who knows what year that'll be. But I mean, when it does, and they're like, this looks familiar, I'm not doing it, you know, and last time I fell for it. What are like top 3 things that people can do in those moments to kind of pull back and take care of themselves?
I'd say the number one thing is what the Apostle Paul tells us is to question everything. Keep that which is good and reject that which is bad. I, being a person who believes in God, I would say, you know, prayer is a really important thing because I would say prayer and meditation, and I don't mean meditation in the, you know,
Transcendental meditation.
Right. I mean it more in the biblical sense.
Listening to God.
Prayer is talking to God. Meditation is listening
Right.
to God. And in that you get answers, right? And I think it's important that people, whatever spirituality they have, is to begin to really understand that there's more to this world than just us, right? I mean,
Right.
There's something beyond this. But then in terms of just other solutions that people can do, I think a lot of it is saying no first, taking a beat before you react.
Yeah.
Just don't feel forced into anything. If anything feels forced upon you, you should be a pretty good clue that it's bad or it's wrong or it's
Well, people have a visceral reaction to it. They just kind of stuff it down.
right.
I mean, I know what happened to me the first time I walked into a store and they stopped me and said, "You need a mask on." I mean, it was physical for me. I was just like, no.
Right.
And they're just like, "Well, then you need to leave." And I'm like, "No."
Right.
But you feel it physically, and I think that's the fear, though, for some people, right?
We went into Whole Foods, right, and all this stuff going on, and I didn't have a mask on, and the manager came running up and said, "Sir, you have to have a mask on." I'm like, "No, I don't. I'm not going to do this." And he backed down right away, and some lady turned around and just got in my face and started telling me that I was the reason that
Citizen
that
arrest.
she was out of work.
Right.
And turns out she was a school teacher and whatever. I can't go back to work because of people like you. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, and again, I don't know if I ran into this lady today, I would never remember what she looks like. But if I ran into her today, I wonder if she would feel silly for the way that she reacted, right?
Yeah.
She was overreacting. She went along with it and overreacted to it. I didn't. And I think that's an important part for people to understand is that take a beat, stop. Don't feel forced into anything. If you feel like something is, you know, like a gun is being put to your head, walk away from the situation, take a breather and
Yeah.
let it absorb for a little while before you decide whether or not you're going to put that needle in your arm or you're going to comply
Right.
with
Right.
comply with the government says. Get both sides of the story. Try and understand what people like you are saying, people like me are saying, and you know, Dr. Mercola and all these other people
Yeah.
out there who are pushing this.
Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, and there's a lot of other practical
Right.
solutions we can talk about too. But
Right.
I think those are kind of the first things that people, you know,
Which
prayer,
goes back
meditation.
to the mental part of it. You know, it goes back to the mind again, which
Right.
is one of the things that I've said. I don't think this could have happened 10 years ago to this degree. I don't think that people would have accepted it
Yeah,
because I don't think the psychological part was planted yet.
yeah.
I mean, whether it's social media or all the propaganda and all that stuff, I don't think it would have happened the way that it did. So it's like the time, for what they have been wanting to do. And I heard that they wanted to do this, like we talked about, like, what was it, 1976, the swine flu, and they tried that, and then
Right, it
40-some
failed.
people, it epically failed, and everybody pushed back. There was no way.
Right.
So it's like you said, they test the waters to what that is. So would you liken where we are today, and we talked a little bit about the transgender movement and all this stuff that's kind of come more of psychological warfare than anything else, and spiritual warfare?
Without a doubt. I mean, I think you're spot on that 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years ago, there were men in this country, right? I mean, guys who literally stood up and defended their women. Where are those guys when all this trans stuff is going on?
Great question.
And I will hand it to guys like, a lot of people are doing the memes about Bud Light right now,
Yeah.
right? It's a big lesson that Bud Light hit a point, an infraction point in this country, an inflection point in this country where people are telling the truth. They're like, no, I'm not going along with that.
Yeah.
This is a minor segment of America. If you want to celebrate that, you should have maybe created a separate beer or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but you don't take and create and change a brand that people know, like, and trust. You've broken and fractured that trust, and it'll take a long time for them to come back. But the mind control is constant and never ending, and it affects the young kids today from the moment that they're born. Essentially, the mind control begins, and it's the weakening of the male female spirit,
Right.
and where our sense of self, our sense of worth, our sense of pride, our sense of strength as unique genders
Right.
is being challenged and changed, and we're being told that
Right.
they have to be homogenized.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the truth of the matter is that if we stand in our own unique sexes, there's power in the female, there's power in the male, and we each have a role to play within the way that we treat the other sex and humanity as a whole, that if we try and recapture that and try and become strong again as male and female, a lot of this crap can't be thrust upon us because you're strengthening your mind against any form of control at that point.
Right. And I think that's a big thing too, though, Todd. I think that a lot of people don't understand that every single thing is interwoven.
Yeah.
They can't, it's like you get behind this or you get behind that or you get behind this, and they don't understand that actually it's all connected. Like you said, there's no way the trans movement would have happened. There's no, I mean, you might see one person in like my first 15 years on the planet.
Right.
And now it's basically been taken over. And so the whole entire thing. So what do you see like a few years from now, as far as like the things that you're tuned into or you're tracking? Do you see more of a shift towards the awakening part of it, or do you see more of a shift towards the fear being weaponized still?
That's a great question. I actually am hopeful. I'm seeing that they went too far with COVID.
Yeah.
They pushed it to the point that now even people who accepted the jab and took it, and even people who've taken 2 or 3 of them, are beginning to stop and go, I won't do this again. And people are beginning to question. You and I were talking off air before we started that I had read, and I think you said you read the same thing, that now 50% of all people are beginning to question all vaccines.
Right.
Right? So there's an awakening happening. There's things, there's all kinds of movements out there where people are questioning everything.
Yeah.
They're questioning all of our history and history. And they're questioning all
I'm
of that.
not going to forget that now.
It's all being challenged. I do see an awakening happening. What I fear for, though, is that if people don't begin to either try and deprogram their children from school or homeschool, better yet.
Yeah, unlearn it.
That you're going to always fight against that, right? They've got a grip and very powerful control on your kids, and part of the way that they do that is that they get the entire class doing it. It normalizes it, and now Johnny and Sally do it, and so Billy's got to follow along and do it too. And recess comes around, and he doesn't want to get made fun of, so or get beat up out on the
No,
playground.
it's true. And even the parents part of it though. It's even like the whole thing with getting the women out of the home.
Yeah.
And the feminist movement, which was funded by Rockefeller, as we know. It's like even because now you can't take care of your kids, you got to put them somewhere.
Right.
And what better place than a government institution?
Right. Exactly.
So I think right?
That
was an oxymoron.
A FEMA camp,
A
pretending
FEMA
to be a
camp.
school.
But that's why I said it's so layered, but it's so connected.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like if somebody were to get out of the weeds and focus on something, when you talk about like personal responsibility, personal accountability, the independent person, right? As far as like who they are, what do you think are things besides obviously we know that we need to educate ourselves on the truth of where we are, right? How much ever that is. The deprogramming part of our kids for sure, that younger generation, which really means us that are leading it, and parents that are
Yep.
leading it. And then what about like the just the mistruths around like the banking industry, the financial part of it, like what makes total sense on that kind of stuff to where people would say like, and all the stuff going on with the banking stuff right now,
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's challenging,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I would have told you a month or two ago, do business with small banks, but it's becoming very apparent that the powers that be have got their eyes set on the small banks, and that they're going to try and consolidate into probably J.P. Morgan Chase, PNC, Bank of America, and maybe a few others.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear that they're going to do that. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're going to try and unbank, like live an unbanked lifestyle, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
I think one thing that people can do though is that should a banking system collapse happen, should we get to the point where the government says, hey, look, you got to take a chip or you got to have this mark or this tattoo to buy or sell? One thing you can do is be invested in precious metals, gold and silver. I mean, everybody says it, which is true though.
Right.
But I also like to say bullets, bullion.
Seeds, heritage seeds.
All great stuff, right? I mean, you could self-sufficiency, self-reliance all boils down to every aspect of your life: security, nutrition, health.
Everything.
Right?
Yeah. And even like with the CBDC coming supposedly in July or whatever, because they did the Fed Now.
Fed Now, yeah.
Fed Now is like took the place of like and then all of a sudden the dude that did Cash App is gone. Interesting.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's just he just
Yeah, I don't know what to make of Fed Now exactly. I think it's,
I was looking at it, but I didn't really spend time on it.
Here's my understanding. I think that Fed Now opens the door
Okay.
to the central bank digital currency. I think it opens the door to government control of yours and my finances on a micro level. I think it does. How soon that'll happen, I don't think it's June when they roll out Fed Now. What my understanding of Fed Now is that it is a way for bank-to-bank clearing to happen instantly versus going through like the SWIFT system or whatever they do now that takes, I think they call it the intraday bank trading, and it takes a little bit of time.
Okay.
It's not as instant as just like clicking a button and it happens.
Right.
But it's probably a Trojan horse. It's
Yeah.
probably going to lead to the next step and the next step and the next step. But again, this is a solution that people could do is put yourself more into a cash position. Go into your local grocery store and pay cash. Go into Home Depot or Ace Hardware or wherever and pay cash. And if they are moving to a cashless place, like there's a restaurant right not too far from here.
Chop Shop.
Chop Shop.
That's the only one. I was going to bring
Right.
them up. That was the only one that I've encountered that are
Right.
no cash.
Right. And during COVID, Thai Chili to Go and a couple others were cashless, but
Okay.
they've kind of gone back to. But you can go into those places and be like, I want to buy from you. How am I
Yeah.
going to do this? And if they're like, we're cashless,
Then you go someplace
take
else.
your business elsewhere. There's no restaurant out there that is that great that you have to eat there.
No, it's true. So where do you see this? Where do you see like I don't know how much you've read on the mRNA stuff going into our foods and our meats and that kind of stuff. So I know like we talk about like where we get our meat and everything
Right.
from local farmers and that, which is the solution that I see.
Yep.
And we will put some links on here too, guys, of like where we've gotten meat and sources and that. All that's going to be in the show notes, just so you know. But where do you see that at? Because I know like a couple of the farmers that we buy our meat from, I've read and watched on their website that they're all refusing it.
Yeah.
But I think that I think it's gonna be more in the factory farming, the bigger corporations. I don't know how they're gonna get away from it.
Yeah. No, I think BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street basically are invested in every major corporation, every publicly traded corporation
Right.
in the world, right? Coca-Cola, Pepsi, you name it. They're Hershey,
Kraft Foods, all of them.
everybody, right? And they own most of the major factory production, right? And so ultimately, at the end of the day, because those organizations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, don't have the best of intents, I see that they will push that further and further into our food supply. From a practical sense, not everybody can do this, but a lot of people can. You can raise your own chickens, right? You can have backyard chickens in most places, and an egg is a complete amino acids. It's a complete protein because it contains every amino acid in there. I don't know that I'm excited about living day in, day out off of eggs, but you can, right?
You can.
And then finding people like what you're talking about. We have a wonderful source. We have some friends here that actually own their own cattle ranch.
Is it Arizona grass fed?
Yeah, it is. Arizona grassland beef.
Yeah.
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 And they literally say right on their website, right on the front page, we do not use the mRNA. Or
mRNA.
Yeah, there you go.
Alphabet
Vaccine.
soup.
The alphabet soup.
Yeah. No, it's true, but it's almost like those of us that saw this coming, and the pushing part of it, it's like these like conspiracy theories are now spoiler alerts.
Yeah.
And so you seriously,
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
It's like you realize this is actually what's coming.
Yeah.
So what about like someone who is just waking up to this? Like you said, like 30 years ago, you kind of jumped in. I was probably 20 something years ago, and you started to realize like where it is. So I think for you and I innately, it's like I always look for a different way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if they're going this way, I'm going that way anyway. Just innately, generally. Yeah. What do you think about people who are just starting to wake up and are just starting to understand it, but they're wrestling with, okay, wait a minute, where's the top down?
Right.
What would you say?
I haven't found the bottom and I haven't found the top. I would say that, look, the only way to eat an elephant is starting with a single bite. Mm-hmm. And don't try and get yourself educated in a single day, because almost everybody I know, it probably happened to you, it definitely happened to me, is you go through a state of depression when you realize how much of a manipulated synthetic world we live in, and how much everything is, it's difficult to trust anything, right? From an institutional standpoint.
Right.
I don't mean people to people is where it's at, right?
Right.
Build community, right?
Great
Find
one.
people like you. And when the student is ready, the master appears.
Right.
That's how we found each other, right? We heard about you through another guy that I know who had heard about you through another guy.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, we started coming on your, every couple weeks or whenever you had your events.
Right.
It was great. No mask. We sat here. We shared. We talked about ideas. We took action on some things. We tried things. Find community. Find people that you know, like, and trust. Find people who are aligned with you in terms of, pretty much everything. Doesn't have to be everything.
Right.
And you don't want to live in a commune with them.
No.
But you want to be able to
It's a resource.
You
I
want to be
think.
able to rely on. You find the
Yeah.
people particularly that you can rely on, that if the phone rings, you can help them, they can help you.
Right.
They can connect you. It's through that you'll find the guy who's growing lettuce and he wants eggs,
Right.
or the guy who needs his faucet repaired, and you can do that, and he's willing to trade you something.
Yeah,
and,
the bartering part.
yeah, I mean, there will be a if the central bank digital currency rolls out and there's people who choose not to go with it, it's not the end. It just means it's going to be a different change of life, and there will be a new monetary system that will emerge for those people that will be bartering, and you know,
Well, I think that's what just the word that came to me is just creating, right? It's like it's like I hear people like creating a different medical system.
Yeah.
You know, more naturopathic, more things like. And I can't remember was her name Kathy that came in here and talked about
she was amazing.
Freedom Alliance or something like that. Yeah, I'll see if we
trying
can
to
find
create
her.
her own little network of
which
naturopath doctors.
it goes back to, right? It goes back to, or if you have the capacity, and I think this is a big thing going back to I know you brought some books on here I want to talk about. Going back to the psychological part of it, if you have a solution-based mindset, a lot of times you stay in that calm. You may not know exactly what the answer is, but you're willing to go, wait a minute, there's got to be a different way, and let me seek that out.
Right.
And then, but do you think there's also another mindset? And I've always wondered, like with all the kids I coach and families, like I always wonder, like, what's the split? What's the split on why you and I and other people see things one way, and then why somebody else was so paralyzed with fear and basically complied to every little thing?
Yeah. Great question. I do have some thoughts on it. I don't know if I have an answer, but
No, I want to hear your thoughts, because I think it's always been so interesting to me.
yeah. So there's definitely a personality trait of people who are curiosity type of people. Curiosity mindset. They're information seekers, right? I don't know if you've been that way. I've been that way my entire life.
I've been that way all my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm always,
I have a girlfriend who said she was born with one eyebrow up.
That's good.
Yeah, no, always.
I was always a kid, like, I'd get an old lawnmower and I'm like, let me see how it works. And I'd take it apart and, I'd self-educate myself. Like next thing I know, I'm fixing motorcycles and, helping neighbor kids get their bikes running and all that stuff. And we were always building bicycles and doing, crazy fun stuff. We would make funny and fun bicycles and stuff.
I had one of my clients really quick that said this to me. She goes, he goes, T, I figured you out. I'm like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And he goes, you're highly disagreeable, but highly conscientious. And I go, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Because it was funny. And then he went into this long, thing about it. And I loved it. And I was like, yeah, I have to say that's probably right. Because when I hear something, if it hits different to me, then I'm going to question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that there's some people who are naturally curious. I think those are the people who tend to be the ones who are the ones who will push back first, because their information is different than what they see.
Right.
The
that makes
official,
sense.
the narrative, right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's like anything. There'll be some people who are kind of below the surface who know something's wrong but don't really know how to get started. I mean, we all know people like that. They're like, I don't know how to get started. I don't know what
I
to
hear
do.
that all the time.
Right, and they're just kind of below the surface. And then there's a really, really big segment of the population who just wants to watch their sports and
They want their latte.
right.
Yeah.
I was going to say beer.
Not Bud Light.
Not Bud Light, right?
But no, it's true, because I think there's that demographic. But my concern is the demographic is not willing to shift to where it's like, you either passively accept or actively reject.
Yeah.
So if you're passively accepting and you think you're Switzerland or you're neutral, you're really not neutral. You've still made a decision.
Yeah.
You're not willing to push back. And I don't know how big that demographic is, but I do think that it's sizable, because I can see a lot of people who are like, well, I'm just going to keep to myself. And I'm like, well, like what you brought up about the men, when good men stand by and are silent, that's you've made your decision to not make a difference. And so that part of it. So what books do you have for us?
Well, I brought a bunch of stuff. One of them you and I have talked about a bunch is King Kill 33.
Okay.
So that's the book. That is,
Yes.
His name is James Shelby Downard, and Michael A. Hoffman co-authored it.
Okay.
And that is the book that explains about the fracturing of the psyche. Okay, and King Kill 33 actually is referencing the killing of JFK and how the world psyche was fractured, and then they were able to launch into a whole bunch of things that began to change the world. And if you think about the world as it was in, let's say, before our time, but our parents' time in the 1950s, let's say, there was an innocence. Okay. Kennedy is killed in 63, November 7th, I think it was, of 63 or somewhere in there. And And so that's at the beginning of the 60s. And the 60s then began, this fracturing happens. There was this innocent level that basically stays to that point. And when that happens, the hippie movement takes off. And sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? And so we wind up growing up in an age where that was normalized, right? We listened to heavy metal bands that were basically cross-dressing, Motley Crue and all these guys were
gender bending, Kiss,
glam rockers and all this other stuff, right? And at the time we didn't understand it, but that laid the foundation to normalize and
it was even androgyny. Some of them came in.
Exactly. You look at
David Bowie.
What's the other guy? The big guy, not Rat. I can't think of the name of the band.
Meatloaf.
No,
I was gonna say.
But anyways, there was
Steven Tyler was one of them
Steven
too.
Tyler's. I mean, think about all of these guys.
Yeah.
A lot of the '80s hair bands.
Yeah.
Were glam rockers, and
Right.
that brought in a level of normalization. Then these people all had babies,
Right.
and there was a softening and a softening and a softening. So King Kill 33 is a book that kind of explains that the fracturing of society begins with a traumatic event, and then what they can begin to place into here. The book goes into it's a difficult read. It's not a beginner's book.
Yeah.
You don't want it to be like, I'm just waking up, let me read this book. You'll be like,
let me go back to bed.
Right. It's hard. You have to, it's something that you would read several years into your awakening.
Right.
But it's a really, really interesting book that explains a lot of where we're at today. And the guy that wrote that, who co-wrote that, he also wrote this book, which is what you had asked me about, which is Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare.
Yes.
And Michael A. Hoffman wrote that book as well. And in that one, he attempts to elaborate. Let me back up. In King Kill 33, he talks a lot about the Freemasons' role in the changing of society. In Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, Michael A. Hoffman then builds upon that and begins to really explain that the role that the secret societies, and not just Freemasons, there's a lot of them, Council on Foreign Relations,
Scottish
Club of
Rite,
Rome, Scottish Rite Freemasons, but there's ones that you don't think of, like the Council of Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, the Bilderbergs. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And so he kind of begins to build on that and begin to show that the things that they're involved with and how deep it goes into society.
Right.
And then he built on top of that one another book called Twilight Language, same author, and he's still alive. This one just came out a couple of years ago, and this one gets into.
I like how you said he's still alive.
Well, I mean,
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah, James Shelby King Kill 33, I think, was written in like the early 80s or something,
wow,
right?
okay.
And so he's the same guy is still writing books.
Yeah.
And if you buy from him, you can't use a credit card. So
Is he banned from that?
he's a guy who doesn't want to participate in it.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys who just doesn't want to participate. You can't really go on his website. You have to mail him a check. And,
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. That you can buy it. These two books, the hardcover ones, you can buy on Amazon.
And we'll put all these in the show notes too.
King Kill 33, you have to order from him directly.
Yeah.
Twilight Language is all three of these are tough books to read.
Yeah.
Twilight Language attempts to show how manipulated we are through lots of institutions, but through the symbology of what we think is normal, like Citgo gas station with a pyramid, and so many. Time Warner, I think it was, used the All-Seeing Eye as their logo. CBS has got the All-Seeing Eye.
Yeah.
He goes into some of that symbology.
Well, even on the back of our dollar.
The back of our dollar,
Yeah.
exactly right. It's got the pyramid and there's got the
And the
All-Seeing Eye.
Yeah. And then it's got the
New World Order.
underneath
Novus
it.
Orders.
Yeah, Sacrum. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so, but this all goes back to, I mean, it goes back to the splitting of our bloodlines, really. I mean, it goes back to the satanic part of the secret societies and the megalithic builders and all that, which is another podcast. But I mean, it goes back that deep, right?
As far as we know, if you go back, there's a book, I've been meaning to read it. I've got it in my library. It's called The Secret Societies of Moses. And it actually, the author of it attempts to show that most secret societies have their origin all the way back to the life of Moses. Not Moses himself, but the lifetime of Moses.
That era. Yeah.
And if you read, I say that the New Testament is a book against the New World Order, because if you read the New Testament, you really read it
Never
kind
thought
of
about that. Yeah.
eyes wide open, you begin to see the Roman influence and what the Roman Empire was trying to do. And actually, it was even before the Romans. You go through the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Kings, Chronicles, and you can see these kings who came in, and that's the Old Testament. And these kings came in, and they a lot of them attempted to rule and change society, mostly through spiritual rituals. And then you would get a guy like David who would come in and trying to get society back on track, and then
Elijah.
Right, and it kind of pulsed. It was
Yeah.
generation to generation changes. Like
Right.
one would be good, maybe two would be good, and then there'd be one or two bad. And
Right.
so, but then you get into the New Testament. In the New Testament, you really you dig into it, and you realize that what really they're telling you, particularly when you get into the book of Revelations, which is like a King Kill 33, difficult to read.
No, for sure.
But it's telling you ultimately at the end of the day that there will be a time where governments will attempt to control you.
Right.
And attempt ultimately as their end goal to take your soul, right?
Right.
Or Satan, really.
Right,
But
right.
he's going to do it through a network of corporations and government, and really Revelation.
All of it,
lays
media, entertainment, all of it.
They're all intertwined.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then what's the last one? Or the other one?
Well, this is a good one too. This one is Rape of the Mind, which talks about again, it's kind of how our minds have been changed through
Like that menticide.
Yep, through institution, basically.
Yeah.
All the different institutions out there have conspired together to change. And the title's great, The Rape of the Mind, right?
Yeah,
It's
true.
telling you
It's
that
violent, too.
it's a violation of your mind. It's a violation of your property to be changed, and somebody's got the eyes on trying to change you and mold you into something different.
Which is where we see this whole thing going with the transhumanism, which is kind of
Exactly.
where the whole thing, because I said that to somebody before, it's like, you're being disconnected from your creator, number one, and then the quote unquote human suffering. What was it, Klaus Schwab? You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Right.
Meanwhile you
Idiot.
hop in your G6 and have fun. But yeah, so it kind of goes all the way like through that to where. So how much do you think the secret society part of it? And I know this is probably a loaded question, but if they go back to biblical times, which we know they do, depending upon the research that you've done and how you kind of connect everything, where do you think that they kind of mesh to where they become one within our government, as far as what people believe is like a local community government versus like the DC, like where do you think they mesh there?
So when you say where do I think, that's a good term, because if I say that I believe something, it's that I know it's true, right?
Yeah.
I have the facts, and if I say that I think, it's kind of a rumination.
Right.
There's plenty of stuff that we can prove that Hillary Rodham Clinton. You just go down and name names. Sit on the Council of Foreign Relations.
There's too many dots.
They've participated in too many of the various secret societies. It's almost every astronaut that's walked on the moon has been a 33rd
Yes.
degree Freemason.
Presidents too.
Most presidents have been. Actually, most kings throughout the world have been some version of the Freemasons, Scottish Rite or one of the other ones. When it gets down to the local level, I think that's a hodgepodge. I don't know that. I don't know that every single person out there is in that. I think that the powers that be would like it that every single person in public office had some sort of allegiance to some sort of a society that controlled government outside of the will of the people.
The puppets, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so last thing. What would you want to leave people with who are, after they listen to this, and maybe we'll put the books in there or whatever, what's like just a couple things that you want to just kind of seed them into realizing that, the awakening happens slowly, right? I mean, unless you're just from a fire hose sometimes, which happens.
Right, yeah.
But what would you say, just like a couple things of ideas that if they read the books and if they want to, more, I know community we talked about, but really just internally, like the mental part of it. What do you think would help support someone in that awakening of reading, digesting, taking it in? What do you think would help support people?
You're far more powerful than you think you are. You've got more abilities to grow within your life than you think that you do, and I mean that in every sense of the word, spiritually, emotionally, physically, getting stronger.
Right.
And in terms of education on these types of things, you don't have to say yes, you can say no. That's a very powerful thing, and you should say no more than you say yes. In most instances, we get ourselves trapped by saying yes. I think that people then should begin to look at their lives and take them apart from of what are the things that I rely upon in life that I can do without, and
great
what are the
statement.
things that I can replace. So do I need to eat at Domino's, or could I eat a salad, and could I grow that lettuce? Learn important skills like shooting, hunting, fishing. I mean, these are good skills, right? Learn, a big thing that we haven't talked about, the gigantic thing, is stop watching TV. Turn off, we call it the idiot box.
It is.
Turn off the
Well,
idiot.
we said television, right?
Yeah, television.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stop watching TV. I mean, it is literally, it's called television programming for a reason. And who's being programmed?
Yep,
you,
we are.
right?
Yeah, and
Stop.
especially kids. I
Right.
think that part of it too.
Right.
And then I just want to add one thing. I think that everything that you said is spot on, Todd. But I think people have to realize that just because they don't want to believe it doesn't make it true.
That's right.
Because I know there's a lot of cognitive dissonance with kids where they're like, oh, well, it's okay if they watch this, it's okay if they watch that, because there's really nothing there.
Right.
But I think everything does leave an impact and imprint.
I like to tell people, your failure to educate you doesn't make me wrong.
Great.
Right. And so, I had this conversation with a relative not that long ago. My wife actually got a little mad at me, but we were talking about, the moon landings. Well, this is going way down the rabbit trail here.
Well, we'll do that sometime.
But isn't it interesting that, NASA says they lost all the telemetry data, all the blueprints and all this stuff. And so I was saying to this family member, I'm saying, isn't it odd? I mean, did we really go? I was questioning, right?
Right.
Like we should be. Apostle Paul says question everything, right? So
Right.
I'm questioning. And this family member looked at me and said, you sound crazy. And I'm like, but your failure to educate you
Right.
doesn't make me crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, why aren't you questioning?
Exactly. That's the question back.
Right.
Right. Why aren't you? Why
doesn't this
people-
bother you?
Right. And that's why I said earlier that was like my like, I'm always wondering the difference. Like when you said it's an innate nature to people
Right.
are more inquisitive or curious. That's always been my thing. It's like, what is it that makes some of us question these things and really convicted on it?
Right.
And other people, I don't know if it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, it does matter. Everything matters. But you start to go through that. So anyway, thank you so much for being here, Todd. I appreciate it very much. And you
Thanks,
guys,
Anya.
all the books and the show notes we're going to put in the show notes. So you have all the information, and we will do this again, hopefully.
Sounds good.
And I will see you guys soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the TLM Nation podcast. I hope you've learned something new and useful. I hope you're willing to ask questions and to seek truth, and be bold in that. Please subscribe, drop us 5 stars and a great review, and we'll see you next time.